the city blocks of Chicago and asking what your thoughts and feelings are currently, and got a wide variety of people to communicate. And I thought like that aspect of using his platform and putting content out in that manner is tremendous. And he's 19 years old and really cares about making a difference. And it takes a lot of courage to use your platform when you have followers that are expecting you to, put out basketball type things and video game type things. When you transfer that over and speaking for social injustices, you could be, you open yourself up for backlash, but he was very confident in his action and did it in the most organic and authentic way. And I was super excited when one of my cousins recommended me having him on the show. So Mazid Auluelu, you're doing awesome work. And I just want to give him a shout out. And I'll pass it to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, that's really amazing. It amazes me too, because I'm 18 and he must be maybe 1 year older than me if he's already in college. And that's really cool to see young people using their platforms in like a really conscientious way. Yeah, I would just echo what Nandi said too about like community gardening and like giving out like herbs or honey. I was just walking in my neighborhood yesterday actually, and I walked past these above ground pots that were like herb gardens, and it was like parsley and mint and like oregano and all this stuff. And I thought that was just like a really cool idea of how to make people, I don't know, think like in terms of like cooking food at home, which generally is like healthier, and also just making it feel more like a community where people care about each other. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, can I pass it back to Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it seems like a lot of us are answering the question, do you have a role in making your community safe? And so last weekend, a close friend who is a nanny and teaches the children that she works with about different cultural history was asked by some of the other parents in her network, because she was doing such a good job, to teach them and show them how they can teach their children. So she asked me if I would help her with it. So even though I was very nervous, I was like, okay, I'll help you teach African-American history. Let's do this. So we're doing a series, and we started last week just in the park. We just went to Minnehaha Park and set up a board. And we were prepping for our very first class when a man walks up to us, and I think he'd seen what was on our board, and it was just facts. And he asked us what we were doing. So we ended up telling him, and he said, well, are you two mothers? We were like, no, we're not mothers. He's like, well, do you plan on being mothers? And we both looked at each other and we were like, not really, it depends on where our lives go. We're not too sure. And then he proceeds to say, well, do you think that you should be teaching this class then to them? And so you have to understand my friend, she's an early childhood education professional. She chooses to nanny, but she could be a teacher. This is what she's done her entire career. And she was asked by these people in her community to do this. And so neither one of us knew how to respond. And for about 15 minutes, we kind of fielded his questions. And then at some point I said, I think we're getting a little bit triggered right now, and we only have a little bit of time to prepare for our call or for our training session today. And so could you please just give us some space? And he tells us that we're hostile, and that now he doesn't feel like he can come up to people like us. And yes, he said people like us in context. Yes, this is a white man. And I'm even shaking, even recalling this story, because I haven't really told it. And so it just, it was just kind of shocking, because it just goes to show, like, even when we are doing something for our community for free, um, because other allies like asked us to do this, we're still met with resistance. And yeah, I don't know. I think before that day, I would say, oh, my role is educating people, my role is teaching people. But now I think one of my biggest roles is learning how to set boundaries and learning how to protect myself as a woman of color, especially in a public place where that could have easily and quickly become a worse situation. And then I'm a Black woman, and it's my word against this man who is visiting from the suburbs and the park. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about my role and how to do the work that I think needs to be done, but how to also protect myself while doing so. So yeah, and I will pass it to Andrew.
Yes, thanks. I actually have a question for all three of you. As someone who's recently been a part of Marnita's table about 6 months now, and to Nandi and maybe Lauren and Elizabeth, I'm not sure how long you've been a part of Marnita's table. You mentioned that you have grown up in and around the table. How have you felt like growing up with Marnita's table, and then having, you know, these awesome environments that are open and able to have these conversations, and then adjusting to when you step out of these environments? I'm just curious from your guys' perspective how that's been.
One more time.
So I'm just curious, from you growing up with Marnita and her table, how has that been? And then how do you feel when you're able to sit in these environments and the people are welcoming, and for the most part they feel safe, and then you step outside of the environment and it's not as safe as when you are part of Marnita's table?
Well, I'll say this. Don't always feel safe at the table because intentional social interaction feels good, but for some it's a push in a direction that they've never thought of going. So I wouldn't even say that I've had this like illusion of safety at the table. I think the table has taught me how to show up and converse about topics that might be uncomfortable, and learning to probe and ask questions in a way that isn't assuming, you know? And so, yeah, I think it's almost inverse, where in the world, you typically aren't given an opportunity to sit with people who've just eaten and are feeling a little, good, to have a very thought-provoking conversation. You know, the world is generally pretty shallow. You have very passerby interactions. So yeah, I think part of what the table does is bring you to a place of comfort so that you can be raw and available to something that's going to put you in a place of discomfort, consciously. And I think having had that experience so frequently in my adolescence has shown me that that dichotomy can create a warmth that is moving, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know. It's always, I think the table has in many ways given me a clearer sense of the world because it's so intentionally diversified. Whereas a lot of spaces are going to have bias in the way that they've done their outreach. And so the rooms aren't going to be as well intentioned and diversified, and, you know, people aren't going to be thinking and prepared to have conversations that go beyond the, so what do you do? You know, that's typically how that goes in a social setting. They see your name tag, they look for a title, try to gauge where you live, orient you based on that title and what kind of work you might do. And then it kind of tapers off. Whereas the table is like, so what do you think about inequity? And then you're halfway through 30 minutes of conversation and you're like, let me get your information. I haven't even asked you your name, you know? So it's kind of like the opposite in that way. And I just remember feeling more empowered from having had to speak to people at 10, you know, like these very big people that I never would have interacted with otherwise, you know, feeling invested in shaking my hand and wanting to know my name and figure out what I'm interested in and if I'm comfortable in that space, which is, you know, kind of warm and fluffy, unlike the world, but in some ways it was like, oh God. And other people are like, oh my God, we're talking about the race thing. And so it's shown me ways that I can navigate that conversation in a way that's still very assertive and confrontational, while also being motivated by love and understanding. I don't know about you, Elizabeth, but I was working with her brother when she was pretty young. So I'm
Oh,
sure you
that's
have
wild.
a memory of that.
Yeah. Um, I would say like one thing that like I've noticed, or I noticed about the table too, like especially when I started like interning, that just like really stood out to me, which isn't a newsflash to any of you guys, but was like the idea of not just like everyone's welcome, like you're all welcome here, but like this space was intentionally created with you in mind. And as someone who like, I mean, like I've been in lots of like everyone's welcome here spaces. Like I feel like that's pretty common. Like, or like in a school setting, it's like everyone's welcome here. Like we're not gonna discriminate. But it's just a different. It's totally different than like we have like done the work to make you feel comfortable, or we have done the work to like make you feel like you can perform at your best, or contribute. Um, and so I think that's, I don't know, that's definitely like a difference between like school. I just graduated from high school, so school and Marnita's table. And like even in high school, like we would try to have conversations about race or about current events in America. Um, and it was just always really, really difficult, because um, first of all, like it was a predominantly white institution, very much so. And so the onus was always on the, you know, people of color and particularly Black students to kind of like explain race in America, which like obviously wasn't their job. And like sometimes, and unfortunately sometimes they would be doing a better job than our teachers who apparently have master's degrees, which is like also disturbing. um, and so again, it was that whole thing of like, oh, it's okay, everyone's welcome here, versus okay, like we have teachers who like are trained in like, you know, helping every student succeed at or perform at the level that um, like that is their best, or actually know American history that wasn't the American history taught, you know, decades ago, but is kind of more the American history that we're coming face to face with today. That's always been there, but not always acknowledged, or understood. Um, so I think that's a big difference between Marnita's table and some of the other spaces I've been in. And I think it's definitely a difference in which other spaces, like, you know, I'm going to college and I kind of doubt that they're probably going to have a similar framework or frame of reference as my high school, where it's like it's okay, everyone's welcome here. But so I think that's definitely a lesson that I've taken away, that it's just not enough to say everyone's welcome here. Or Lauren like has this great analogy of like you invite someone who's in a wheelchair to your house, but there are steps in front of your house, and you say, it's okay, everyone's welcome here. But, you know, like it's obviously, first of all, more intimidating and literally like impossible for this person to get up those steps without a lot of help. Or so yeah, that's a lesson I've had. Any?
I think both of those answers, I mean, you guys took my question and I naively asked it incorrectly, and you guys answered it beautifully. So thank you for sharing that. And that's why I mean,
That's what happens at the table, Andrew.
yeah.
Constantly. And I just found myself doing the same thing yesterday during a work meeting. And I was like, oh, shoot. Totally brought up a whole new, you know,
Yes.
It's always like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate your question. It got me thinking.
Awesome. I continuing to learn about Marnita's table, the science behind it, and then the way people feel and while they're in it, and then how they feel after it. It's really is beautiful, and I'm super excited that I am able to have this role here. And Lauren, I'd like to ask you the same question. How has it been like working in this situation?
Yeah, that's so funny because as they were talking, I was thinking about it from a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old lens, attending something like this for the first time. Well, I was 19, so I wasn't an adult really. I hadn't really been in work environments that were not diverse at all, as many adults in Minnesota find themselves in. But I also didn't come to the table as a child, so it wasn't just how I conversed. It, you know, it wasn't a part of my toolkit, I guess, when I was having conversations with people who were different. And it's funny that you said that, Nandi, that usually you don't have an opportunity to go in deep with people, but for some reason growing up, I actually feel like I did have that happen. And maybe it was because I was, for those of you, I grew up on a red line. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that I would. Like, I remember going to a family's house, and this was, God, I was in the 6th grade, and they asked me, why are you different from all the other Black kids? This is the parents at dinner at their house over spaghetti and meatballs. I remember it like it was yesterday because that's something that kind of stops a 12-year-old in their tracks. And so I wish I would have had the opportunity to go to the table when I was younger, because I think I found myself in so many situations where I was just unprepared to take those questions and to answer them. And so I think when I came to the table, being a freshman in college, we were already having these conversations, kind of like what you talked about, Elizabeth. You are anticipating having those conversations. Well, I was having those conversations at the exact time that I came to the table. And I think it really did help me. Like, it prepared me to do what I inevitably, as I could see from last week, am going to probably have to do for the rest of my life, as long as I'm living in a diverse environment. And I think working at the table, in some ways, because we are a part of intentionally creating that space, it's a little bit different from being a guest or being an attendee. And so it's always very refreshing to hear what it's like from the other side. And so often I think we have adults come and tell us, adults of color, say, wow, I haven't been in a diverse space in such a long time. Like, this is so refreshing. And so what Nandi said, I think really hit me, because that was your norm, right? Like, that you were so young when you came, that it was just a part of it wasn't perceived as safety for you because it was just a part of your normal. Whereas these are people who have been in the workforce for 5, 10, 15, 20 years or lived in Minnesota, as an adult. And it is a place of refuge for them because they have to navigate these spaces that aren't diverse at all, every single day. And so, yeah, I'm loving your question, Angie. Thank you so much for asking it, because we all three have very different answers. And I think that goes to show just how the space is created. Like it's created for all three of us to have completely different experiences that are catered to us, and essentially what we needed from the experience, if that makes sense. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about all this all the time now that like Lauren and I work together. She and I went to church together at the same time I was going to table events on Saturdays, and I had no idea how long she had been working for the table while I was, in school and doing all these other things. And I come home from Atlanta and I'm like, oh, Lauren, you work here now? And it was just like, it brings me back to this idea of like how we were brought up in the same community and we've gravitated towards similar things and circled back to Marnita's table. And I don't know, we're now just like building safety, and we're building this next generation that's going to think differently about how we, involve ourselves with one another. And I don't know, it's just very odd to think about how we've all just kind of, I don't know, having known Lauren in such a separate context and then coming back to working with her at the table is so crazy. Because, going to our church, we, like I said, it was very much like we go to church, you have a pretty general interaction, and they say they're praying for you, and and then you part ways. But like the nights before that, on Saturdays, I had just, come from these very lively events where, Marnita has her gong and there's music and all different types of foods. So it is, I think, when Lauren and I, and probably Elizabeth too, present in the world, we show up as individuals that are kind of odd to people. Like, why are you so willing to talk about things, and like, why are you so open to all these different perspectives, and how are you so good with gab? You know what I'm saying? I think that was something that you can see in a lot of the other people, like Aswar, for example, is another person on our team, just a great orator, in addition to just being good at his actual job. He's just been formed into a leader in the person that he is today, partly because of his experience at the table and then the things that he was inspired to do or pursue, outside of the table, being strengthened by that experience. So I think that's very true for my life. And I can say from the outside looking in, it seems to be the case for him. Yeah.
Yeah, and from working at the table, I think I've seen that happen often, where people who kind of sort of knew each other from another context are able to dive deeper and explore a relationship a little bit more than they were potentially able to in another environment, especially with Minnesota being so small. Really, it's a small town and a big city kind of at the same time, the Twin Cities. And so it's common that people have heard of each other or know of each other, but it provides a space to go there and to really, really get to know that person. Like Nandi said, we met in a conservative environment where having these conversations wasn't always the safest to do. So yeah, and I've seen that happen. It's not just us. I've seen it happen countless times. So, but I'm going to pass it to Elizabeth. Is there a question that you'd like to answer?
I don't know, not at the moment. If someone else has something ready to go.
I'd actually like to ask you a question, Elizabeth, and feel free to answer it. With you going to school here in the fall, going to college, um, is there something that you're excited about to utilize what you've learned through Marnita's Table, going into school, going into a new environment, and having kind of a preconceived notion that it might be similar to like the reserved, predictable high school approach with dealing with racism and social injustices?
Yeah, I guess like it's just gonna be tougher in the fall, like because of Zoom and everything, which is it's just like a different way of meeting people, but we'll see. But I think generally speaking, I feel like just like having lots of like having had the summer experience, especially like with like being really involved with Marnita's Table, like has definitely allowed me to like talk to just like lots of different like people, like both like people who are interested in the table and like the team, and like people who are invited to events, and so like that's just all been really interesting, and hearing lots of different people's perspective on safety and health, and their communities and what they want to see in their communities, um, and so I feel like it's definitely like helped prepare me to like go into like a wider world where there are probably going to be lots of people like across difference. um I feel like in college, like I definitely like I feel like this is just such a like amazing model, intentional social interaction, and I feel like it'd be really cool to like bring it to college. I don't know how that would work with like COVID and stuff, so maybe it wouldn't be first semester, but I feel like it would just be like really really cool. I know also, especially for the school that I'm going to the University of Virginia, and they have like lots of like deep rooted kind of issues like around difference, especially around race, because it was like Mr. Jefferson's university, like it was built by slaves, and like even like I've been following them on Instagram and stuff now, and like even in the last couple months, it's like they unveiled like this new athletics logo, like which it turned out had references to these walls on campus that were actually used to hide slaves that were working from view of like the white students who were attending university, and like there were references to these walls because like contemporarily they're kind of like cool and like unique looking, but the true history is that they're actually there were some really negative reasons behind building those walls, and they're still standing, and so like it just seems like there's a lot, and of course I think any institution will have like these deep-seated issues, any American institution, but it definitely seems like there's a lot to kind of like dig into and like discuss, and it's also a totally different part of the country for me. It's in the South, it's on the East Coast, so I think that I'll definitely try to bring what I've learned there, when I go in the fall. Yeah. I'm curious too for Lauren and Nandi, like if you found in college like any skills that you like learned at the table were particularly useful, or how you were able to use that or approach that.
I think it's mostly the conversation. Having tools to engage, and it's more than the tools, having the experience, because you will find yourself in class with people who have never spent time with a person of color, and they just think they're so right when it comes to whatever they're debating, and I think having the experience made me feel very comfortable speaking up in class. And like Nandi said, you see you're kind of the weird one out, and people after class are like, why are you okay with you know, going toe to toe, and you know, how do you feel comfortable doing this, you know, as a freshman? And I think that having that experience will definitely serve you well. One of the things you made me think about was how just the other day, a good friend said that her mom was looking at the deed on her house, and it still says that you can't sell it to like a Black person, and like it still says that. It wasn't ever removed. And so yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading about what's going on at the University of Minnesota right now, which is where I went, in the buildings that people are still trying to be changed, right? Like any institution, any neighborhood, anywhere you go in this country, there's going to be some type of discovery that you will make about how it's rooted in racism and white supremacy. And so I think it's interesting, and it's awesome that you're already finding that out before you go to your school, because I think for me that was a wake-up call. I didn't know that before I got to school. Yeah.
My experience was unique in that I started at a historically Black college and then transferred to a state institution. And I'll say the best thing that I gained, or I guess my favorite, maybe not the best, but my favorite is just that I'm not afraid to connect with people across generation. I have friends who are well over 60. And more importantly, I don't have a problem approaching my professors to have conversations. I find that a lot of young people feel this like sense of, I don't know, nervousness when approaching an adult, you know? And now you're an adult, and so there's this awkward phase of like, how do I talk to my professor? And I find that we all have this way of not talking to our professor until we're in like absolute need. But it's always worked in my favor to just connect and communicate with my educators, because after all, they're imparting knowledge upon me. So I'm interested to know about who they are as people. And you know, we forget, like, this is someone that you're going to spend an hour of 3 days out of the week staring at, trying to teach you things. So like, why not connect with them as a person? They might, you know, have more information to provide you. And you know, I just always find that those conversations are vital to like what you do beyond the classroom. And what you do beyond the classroom is what becomes your life ultimately. And so you like, college is this time where you start to transition as an adult that's like, oh, like now there's life to be lived outside of me, you know, sitting at a desk. And so that just general sense of constantly seeking, not just information, but seeking to understand other perspectives from people, including your peers as well as your professors and, you know, the staff on campus that, you know, you don't necessarily have to interact with them, but if you see them often, or if you see them at all, there's humans that are operating and keeping the buildings and all those things going. Why not converse with them? They're part of your community. And so I think I was kind of weird in that sense too, where I was like wanting to seek understanding from people beyond the campus and like on the campus, where, you know, a lot of girls are just like, I go and I use the facility and I'm leaving. But like, why not know the mailman? If he knows you, then you know, you're better connected to all those Amazon packages that you're gonna get. Or like, you know, knowing the ladies in the cafeteria, you know, they make your food. they're human people, like I think we get this sense of entitlement being students and distance ourselves from the community that we are physically a part of and forcing our way into. Whereas there are people who have been there for years beyond you and will continue to be there for years beyond your 4-year experience. And your presence is impacting them, and their presence or lack thereof would impact you. So just thinking of your college and the community beyond your campus, that was really important to me going to school. And again, it wasn't always fun. It was kind of isolating because, nobody wants to really think about things that are beyond the scope of them getting decent grades and having a good time. But I found that I had a better time when I actually felt connected with the community, just because there were more people to look out for me and impart wisdom on me and tell me what fun things are happening around. But yeah, and then in contrast to going from that HBCU experience to a state school, it was the same thing where it's like, now this is a broader thing. And it's not just Black people here. How are the Black people intermingling with the other institutions and other people that are around and other sororities and fraternities? And, why aren't we intermingling? I guess in my case, it seemed like my school, I went to Georgia State, and it seemed very like Black in certain ways, and then very segregated in like Latino, white, and other populations that kind of just did their own thing with each other. So I don't know. I was one of those people that was like, why? How do we connect across difference? And Georgia State is known for educating people across the age spectrum because we have, that ability for people to go back as seniors for free. And then we're known for a non-traditional student campus. So you might have biology class with a woman who's got 5 kids and a whole other career going. And it's like, what? You know what I'm saying? So it was very interesting to meet people like that. And, we're sharing answers and helping each other study and stuff like that. And it's like, you have this whole other life you're living, and you have all these amazing things to show me and teach me beyond biology concepts, and like you might find that with your peers and things. So that was something that I really took away or took into college with me from Marnita's table.
I absolutely love that, Nandi, and that's why I started the podcast that I did, was to have those conversations with professors and faculty members that I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to take their class because it didn't fit in the curriculum, or just to even get to know, like, have the ability to sit down with the president of my university because I have a platform that she wants to, enhance. So Elizabeth, if you feel comfortable, I'm the first one to suggest always start a podcast, because it creates a space where people want to contribute. They get excited to share about themselves, because for the most part, people tend to feel like they're being verbose or cocky when they talk about themselves. But when you create a space for them to share their personal experiences with being at the university, and even just like their deepest passions and what they care about, podcasting is not just for the listeners, but it's really for the people that are sitting in that little environment. I always say I'm able to win the most because I have the chance to be curious and ask the question and understand how another person's feeling at that current time, at that current state in life. So the perfect opportunity, start a podcast. I'll produce it for you.
Good to know. That's a really interesting read too, that it's not just for the listeners, but just to chat and to intentionally make a space. So that's very cool.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, if you did want to start a chapter, one of my first jobs when I came to work for Marnita's table was helping the table at St. Olaf and like training their members in and helping them with their first table. So if you are interested in starting a chapter next year, just let me know.
I will. I
and,
absolutely will.
and we can hold dizzies instead of izzies.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, we'll
I'm sure
see.
you'll be able to submit your podcast episodes and chapters and stuff like that for a lot of school projects. You know, that would be cool.
Double duty.
Yeah, I'm thinking about just everything that we're talking about. Do you know what you need to feel safe in your community? And it's funny because I think at every new stage in life, kind of like I talked about when I first opened up, I'm still learning what my role is. Every new stage, it's something different. At every new stage, I feel like I need something different to feel safe. For a long time, it wasn't knowledge. It was just having adults in my life that I could rely on in my neighborhood when and if I were to get in trouble in some type of way. Yeah, it's been really nice to hear from people who are kind of at a different stage than me in their life. So thank you. And Andrew, I'm curious for you because you moved here from somewhere else, correct? So when you first came to Minnesota, you didn't start your podcast for a couple of years, right? Like that wasn't the first thing that you did when you got to Minnesota. So what was that experience like, adjusting, I guess, culturally, for you?
Yep. I'm originally from the suburbs of Chicago, and I didn't know anyone coming up. I just came up to play football at the University of St. Thomas, and I started the Back Pocket year 3, so I was a junior. And at first, it was super uncomfortable because I was putting this content out, and I was hesitant to have a space where people can hold me accountable, because I'm saying things and now it's recorded and it's out there. Will I say something wrong? Will employers hold me accountable and not hire me because of this? Because I'm looking for jobs at that time. And as I moved through it, I realized like the more conversations that I was having, I was able to, truly share who I am. And any person that was reluctant to see that probably wouldn't have been a great fit. So I started moving away from having that fear base of not showing my true self with reservations to eventually like overly saying who I am, because I was like, I want everyone to truly know who I am. And that is how I'll create a better connection. And the people that veer away from that, it wasn't meant to be. And I'm never doing it in a way to negatively put out anything, but sometimes, you say something when you do 270 episodes, there's bound to be something to spark a little controversy. But the aspect of just sitting down and having these conversations is crazy rewarding. I've never been more energized than after doing a podcast recording and sitting down and listening to someone for an hour and a half and just being curious in their story, and then having them share what they feel confident and comfortable with, and go in depth on it. Because today's day and age, technology or some type of wall gets put up to actually dig deep into an individual when you're sitting around a living room or you're out to dinner, something like that. Usually someone doesn't want to share exactly, or someone's not as locked in as you'd want them to be. So these podcasts are the most rewarding thing that I've been able to do to date. And as funny as it sounds, it's just a podcast. It's just a conversation. I'm not doing anything extraordinary. I'm not doing anything different than anyone else. But the habitual action of it and the habitual intention of being curious has helped me grow and just feel more confident in myself. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, and I love that you said being curious, because we always say, instead of cross-cultural competency, it's more cross-cultural humility and curiosity, right? Like you can never be competent in someone else's experience. That's just not real. But you can always be curious. You can always be humble and know that you don't know everything and that this is a journey. So I loved when you said that. And I see that we're coming to the end of our time here. And so I just wanted to open it up to all of you and ask, is there anything else that you're dying to say that you want to share with the people?
Reach out and ask a question. Yeah, I want to second what Andrew said. Sometimes people feel boastful and self-centered talking about themselves, but you'd be surprised what flow of information can fall on you when you just ask a genuine question to someone. Lately, I've been practicing asking people, what's on your mind? Rather than, hi, how are you? We are so accustomed to that flow of the phrase that we just kind of say, good. You know, like that's the first thing you practice when you're learning a new language. Come on, estás? Good. And then that's it. But I've been practicing asking, what's on your mind? And it kind of takes people aback when I say it and they say the first thing that's on their mind, and then we just go from there. So yeah, reach out and ask any question and be open to what might come of that. Because that's how I ended up doing the beekeeping today. Yeah, I just asked a question and they offered to show me around.
Perfect way to end. Thank you, Nandi. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. You can find this episode next Thursday morning at 10. And we will be back next week for our 11th episode. Wow, that happened so quickly. Thank you, Andrew, for all of your amazing production skills. And we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.